Hello, everybody, my listeners. I'm glad that you are tuning in to listen to Democratization of Africa, the case of Uganda in comparative perspective. As I promised today, we are beginning a new series of conversations. Today we are beginning a look at the 1995 Constitution. The 1995 Constitution is a very fascinating political creature that defies an accurate jurisprudential definition. It was praised as an authentic political innovation that produced a unique African political system called the movement. We were also told that bare-footed Ugandan villagers contributed to its content, thereby acquiring a universal legitimacy among all the people of Uganda. Very few people I am aware of, however, were able to recognize the fact that the 1995 Constitution was born with serious jurisprudential deformities. Article 20 declared the human rights are inherent and therefore not granted to the people by the state. Article 29 spelled out in detail the human rights that every Ugandan was entitled to enjoy by virtue of his or her humanity. Unfortunately, Article 269 of the same Constitution nullified both Article 20 and 29 by providing that as long as the movement system was in force, political parties were not allowed to operate their branch offices, hold delegates conferences, hold public rallies, sponsor candidates for any public elections, or carry on activities that may interfere with the movement system. Worse still, Article 74 contradicted Article 20 by providing that the inherent rights which are not granted by the state can in fact be taken away by a majority vote in a referendum to determine whether the movement system should continue or not. Such a referendum, in fact, took place in 2001, in which the majority voted not to allow a return to multi-parties by majority vote. The fundamental question that we shall have to answer in the next series of conversations is, was the 1995 Constitution a paradox, a contradiction, or a political fraud? Before we answer this question, we shall do two things. First, we shall study, analyze, and critique the content of Museveni's metamorphosis social theory, also known as the sectarian social theory. This theory was the basis to include Articles 74 and 269 in the Constitution. Second, we shall look at the NRM political philosophy as reflected in the Constituent Assembly that enacted the 1995 Constitution. Before we study the provisions of the Constitution in detail. Now, back to the theory. Museveni's first articulated his social theory in a campaign manifesto in 1996. Thereafter, we shall refer to it just as the manifesto. The manifesto, in that manifesto, Museveni wrote, and I'm quoting, it's a long quotation, you'll bear with me. It is Africa's backwardness in general, and Uganda's in particular, that we seek to eliminate. Uganda and Africa are backward because all economies and societies that are still largely based on pre-capitalist modes of production and social structures, tribalism, tribal communalism, a depressed caste cash crop economy, which in the past depended on foreign markets, and a largely subsistence economy on the edge of the money economy. Europe, on the other hand, has undergone a most dramatic social metamorphosis over the last 500 years. What was a feudal peasant society dependent on the horse and the ox plow is now space-age society dependent on electric and nuclear power. Europe is now largely a society composed of a middle class and a skilled working class. For example, the social structure of the United Kingdom at the present is as follows. The upper class is 2% of the population, the middle class is 52%, and the working class is 46%. By the middle of the 19th century, Uganda had become a three-class society of feudalists, artisans, and peasants. However, the situation at present is as follows. Peasants make up 92% of the population. The middle class 4%, and the working class 4%. Ugandan society has regressed from being a three-class society in 1880s to becoming an almost exclusively peasant society. The crucial differences between the Europe of 1789, the year of the French Revolution, and the Uganda of 1860 was that our artisans had not developed into capitalists, and also there was no working class. It was this difference, Museveni says, in social configuration, among other factors, that caused the quick and ignominious capitulation of Uganda's feudal leaders to British colonialism. This scenario was replicated elsewhere in Africa. Therefore, the black African society is still devoid of the engine of growth that caused economic and social transformation in Europe, the middle class. It is the absence of the kind of social metamorphosis which took place in Europe that is precisely the core of Africa's problems. I'm quoting this in full because our discussion will be centered on its content. The following year, in sowing the mustard seed, that is 1997, Museveni restated the same theory with a few modifications and clarifications. For example, he pointed out that pre-capitalist polarizations based on identity rather than nationality can be extremely injurious to a country. He also explicitly incorporated sectarianism as a component of his theory of social metamorphosis. Quote, sectarianism is a consequence of an incomplete social metamorphosis, he wrote, in sowing the mustard seed. Consequently, Museveni suggested that the most extreme blow to sectarianism is to monetize the whole economy, which will undermine the subsistence existence of most Africans. It will mean that people are free to produce and free to exchange what they produce. Then they will be able to value one another and have a common interest in stability. From the premises of his theory, Museveni concluded that a commodity relationship between one area and another will in time undermine sectarianism. Therefore, ethnicity and sectarianism, in my view, that is Museveni writing, are short-term problems caused by failure to identify the real interests of the people. Unquote. Museveni does not cite a single source of information for his theory. He does not, for example, reveal whether the theory he is advocating is the result of his industrious personal studies of social phenomena and their transformation in history, although that seems to be implied, or his endorsement of a social theory he is acquainted with and whose premises he agrees with or finds to be empirically sound. The first problem is that there is a total absence of intellectual honesty and transparency in Museveni's theory. He expects his readers to take the validity of his theory for granted. However, we find that Museveni's theory of social metamorphosis bears a very close resemblance to the capital theory formulated by Karl Marx, which I described in my initial conversations. For purposes of comparison, we briefly summarize the capital theory before we analyze, criticize, or otherwise test the validity of the premises of the social metamorphosis theory. According to the capital theory written by Karl Marx, production of commodities is a social force which activates social processes, constitutes social relations and determines the character and the content of the elements of social reality. The purpose of capitalist production is the creation of surplus value or the accumulation of capital. The accumulation of capital causes the formation of classes and their division into antagonistic social classes, namely the proletariat and the bourgeois classes. The bourgeois class economically exploits and politically dominates the proletariat class. Social reality is essentially determined by economic processes. Consciousness under capitalism is, for example, according to the capital theory, an inverted reflex of the economic relations in society. Law and the state are capitalist phenomena which historically developed at the same time as the emergence of private property. The political problems of social organization are essentially the result of class conflicts. Causation of social and political processes is by activated material factors. Abolition of private property will extinguish social classes and automatically lead to the development of a higher type of social system characterized by social harmony, justice, equality of all people, and the absence of domination by one social group over the others. The mechanism of social causation postulated by the capital theory is a dialectical transformation or metabolic social conversion process. This means that from the simplest to the most complex, each economic process gives rise to a more complex one. For example, from the interaction between nature and man, or the raw materials and labor, you get commodities. The saturation of commodities gives rise to money, and the accumulation of money creates capital. Thus, the more advanced a capitalist system gets, or the more capital is accumulated, the greater social injustice it causes, because the more capital is accumulated, the bigger the proletariat class grows until social conditions become intolerable to the point of sparking off a revolution. Fundamental social change is by revolution, not that word, fundamental social change. Guess who has used that phrase very frequently? This form of social change is in itself a dialectical process of social transformation, of which a social revolution is the highest point of marking a clear end of one type of social relationships and the beginning of another. After socialist revolution caused by class conflict, a socialist system is established under the dictatorship of the proletariat. Political freedom is restricted to the administration of things and dictatorship of the proletariat. A socialist system similarly undergoes a process of transformation into a higher, more perfect social system of communism, which, judging by the logical structure of the capital theory, as a whole, and the mechanism of social causation postulated by the theory, is the terminal stage in the constitutional evolution. When a particular social transformation reaches maturity, its productive forces and social relations become incompatible, leading to an abruptly revolutionary social change, which transforms the system into a higher type of social transformation, producing a new arrangement of production processes, social relationships, and even consciousness or ideology. This is how production is both a causal factor in history and a determinant of the elements of social reality as at any given time and place. According to the capital theory, social systems evolved from the primitive tribal systems to feudalism, and from feudalism to capitalism, which inevitably by revolution is or will be replaced by a socialist system. The socialist system is then supposed to evolve into a more perfect and ultimate social system of communism, where equality is perfect, justice is absolute, and hence the irrelevance of law and the state in general, and constitutional law in particular, in creating social harmony and restructuring social relations. In its final form of evolution under a communist system, the state and law automatically wither away, leaving in their wake the perfect administration of things, where there are no classes and therefore no political conflicts, read sectarianism, or oppressive regimes. The resemblance between Museveni's social metamorphosis theory and Karl Marx's capital theory is obvious. In both theories, classes are not important activating components of the society, especially in its various stages of evolution. In the capital theory, classes are the consequences of accumulating capital in the process of production. In Museveni's metamorphosis social theory, class is an amorphous product of social change, or can we say evolution, whose causes are not clearly explained. The existence of classes is directly related to the idea of political freedom in both theories. In both theories also, ideology or consciousness of social relations, in other words, also sectarianism, is political destiny. One thing is also clear, however. Capital theory has been rendered invalid by the history of the Soviet Union. Its birthplace and apparent terminal destiny of resting place. Nobody expects a socialist political system to evolve further into a communist system as postulated by the capital theory, where justice and equality of people is perfect and the state and law wither away. The future of ideology in Museveni's theory is left hanging after communism was wrecked on the sharp political rocks of history in the Soviet Union. Museveni's politics, however, remain masked in his socialist rhetoric discussed in earlier conversations, even as he tightly hangs on to the virtues of capitalism, as we shall demonstrate in the in this conversation. Communist politics was premised on the supremacy of the communist ideology. And communist ideology denigrated all other ideologies just as Museveni does. We have seen in earlier conversations that even though Museveni does not clearly define what an ideology is, he nevertheless regards the specific ideology he believes in as the ultimate test of good politics and enlightened leadership all politicians must be judged by. The ideology Museveni espouses in his political rhetoric, as manifested in sowing a mustard seed, is clearly socialist, even though he does not openly embrace it. Under communist ideology, human rights are not inalienable, but subject to the dictatorship of the proletariat. Individuals and the communist regime did not have rights to political freedom if their beliefs and political objectives or aspirations clashed with the communist ideology. This was the premise of the ideology of the one-party system under communism, resurrected by Museveni as a no-party movement system that justifies its existence on the prevention of sectarian supposedly caused by the absence of the middle class. Similarly, Museveni believes that, quote, unlike the law of Moses, most human rights are not divinely ordained and are subject to modification to fit the political and socio-economic conditions, unquote. That is from, quoted from, it is quoted by an article in Human Rights Watch about Uganda entitled Hostile to Democracy, the Movement System and Political Repression in Uganda. It was published in 1999. And Museveni is quoted making that statement. He made it on Liberation Day, January 26, 1999. This is Museveni is saying that the human rights are not ordained. They don't have to be protected. They don't belong to the people. So he, in some way, Museveni is very close to or similar to the communists when it comes to protecting human rights. So the demise of the Soviet system essentially revoked the supremacy of communist ideology and a one-party political system in Russia, and restored the idea of political freedom and inalienable human rights for all people of Russia, Russian society, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. In Uganda, the multi-party political system was restored after the revocation of the movement no-party system in 2005 through the constitutional amendment, even though political freedom, that is, freedom to assemble and associate, continued to be suppressed by NRM. In some respects, the resemblance of Museveni's social metamorphosis theory is very striking, if not impressive, but unfortunately very superficial at the same time. Under Museveni's theory, like under the communist and capital theory of social evolution, political freedom had to be suppressed or suspended under a certain configuration of social classes, until certain classes, the middle class, to be more specific, existed. This is an important finding. It tells us what Museveni will not tell you explicitly. It signals at a hidden political agenda masked in an ideological cloak. Museveni explicitly stated that, quote, "We in NRM argued that there are no healthy grounds for party political polarization in Uganda at this time." This time means 1986, because of the absence of social classes in Western democracies. Parties have usually been founded on the same sort of class basis. Parties for the middle class, parties for the workers, and so on. On what basis, Museveni asks, would parties in Uganda be formed, since Ugandans are overwhelmingly of one class, that is peasants? The polarization one is likely to get in Uganda, and the countries like it, is vertical polarization. Tribe A will join Party A, Tribe B will join Party B, and so on. They will be sectarian. What is crucial for Uganda now is for us to have a system that ensures democratic participation until such time as we get, through economic development, especially industrialization, the crystallization of socio-economic groups upon which we can base healthy political parties. And that is Museveni talking in the sowing the mustard seed. The statement quoted from the sowing of the mustard seed, obviously, it's a political statement and not a scientific statement about valid causal relations in society. It is an individual's opinion expressing political preference of a specific political system. It was therefore not surprising that under the dictates of politics, in an apparent contradiction, Museveni himself abandoned his ideological convictions and led to the campaign, even resorting to bribery of members of parliament in order to achieve his political objective, aimed at restoring a multi-party political system to Uganda in 2005. A system he had openly declared which depended on the existence of specific class configurations. The people in 2005 still belonged, that is the Ugandans, still belonged to the same demographic classes configuration cited by Museveni, quoted above in the sowing the mustard seed. In 2005, Museveni's political interests had changed 180 degrees around. One wonders what was driving his behavior. his intellectual faith in a valid social theory or his material convictions in a specific ideology and personal desire and greed for political power. There are three fatal errors in Museveni's theory. The first and most obvious is the equation of inalienable human rights with the existence of a specific class configuration in society, namely a substantial middle class caused by industrialization and or modernization. The rights of individuals to political freedom do not depend on their class status or a specific class configuration in the society. In fact, Article 21 of the Uganda Constitution enacted in 1995 declares so, quote, fundamental rights and freedoms of the individual are inherent and not granted by the state, unquote. However, Museveni and the makers of the 1995 Constitution found a devious way to go around this article of the Constitution, leading us to the second error. On Museveni's erroneous premises of the theory of social metamorphosis described above, the CA Constituent Assembly, that is, voted overwhelmingly not to have political parties at this stage and to put the matter to a referendum in the year 2000. That's Museveni. Before the Constituent Assembly voted overwhelmingly, as Museveni puts it, to suspend the operation of the political parties, they relied on another erroneous reasoning in the report of the Constitutional Commission. As Museveni argues, certainly consistent with the premises of his invalid theory of social metamorphosis, quote, the assignment of the commission, which started work in February 1989, was to find out how the people wanted to be governed. There was a questionnaire containing the various topics which they knew to be typical, such as, would you like political parties to be brought back or to wait for a period for this? This is obviously Museveni in his sowing the master's seed. In the final analysis, Museveni, who had been relentlessly preaching the virtues of his theory to the nation after taking over power in January 1986, and had enacted a law in 1988 to outlaw sectarianism, he concluded that, I think the final report of the Constitutional Commission, that is, was quite representative of the people's views, because on some of the crucial points, such as whether or not political parties should become fully operational or not, I knew the opinion in the country to be against parties, and this is what the report showed. In fact, the commissioners watered down what the people wanted. The people did not want the return to party activities 5 years from the first elections held under the new constitution. Therefore, the commission was a temporizing force as far as the local and the international thinking, especially in political parties, on political parties rather than reflecting the views of the people themselves. What is Museveni trying to rationalize here? He's trying to say that the majority can vote to deny you a right as a human right. And yet, Article 20 of the Constitution says these rights are inherent in humanity. They are not granted by the state. So you can see he's bubbling around with these concepts just to reach a suitable political conclusion he desires. The fatal error in this reasoning, Museveni's reasoning, although compatible with the Museveni's invalid theory, was that the majority had the right to take away the inalienable or inherent rights of the minority who believed in the existence of multi-parties. This was clearly defective political reasoning, inconsistent with the protection of inalienable human rights. Needless to say, the reasoning was a blatant violation of Article 20 of the Constitution. Either Article 20 was a hoax and Museveni's theory valid, or it was invalid and the suspension of the operation of political parties illegal and unconstitutional. This paradox produced the 1995 Constitution. More specifically, what crippled the 1995 Constitution were Articles 69 to 76, which established the movement system. Those articles effectively rendered Article 20 inoperative because they incorporated Museveni's social theory in the Constitution. The argument of what the majority of the people wanted is irrelevant when it comes to the protection of inalienable human rights of the minorities. The 1995 Constitution was a contradiction that could not democratize Uganda because it embraced contradictions, enforced and imposed Museveni's invalid social theory on the country. The third error is to be found exclusively in the premises of Museveni's theory itself. It has two parts to it. The first part is to assume that a causal relationship between political parties and the class structure does in fact exist. Political parties are not determined by all the consequences of class configurations in society. Political parties are woven together by political philosophy or ideology. The Democratic Party in US and the Labour Party in UK share philosophical kinship. They are not held together by class structures. The rich and poor belong to the two parties. Similarly, the Republican Party in the US and the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom consist of both poor and rich people of different classes. So Museveni's claim that class structure determines allegiance to political parties is false. It's wrong, and there is no evidence for it. It is the conservative philosophy or the political philosophy or ideology that holds members of these parties, whether they are U.S. parties or they are United Kingdom parties, together. They unite the poor and the rich in a single political party, as Museveni erroneously argued. There is no such thing as a political party exclusively for the working class and a political party for the middle class or upper classes. Museveni's quotation of the class demography in the United Kingdom, which I quoted from his campaign literature to justify his very theoretical premises, was misconceived and obviously erroneous. Second, part of the third error is a false linkage between sectarianism and political parties. If political parties are essentially held together by political philosophy, the linkage between sectarianism and political parties is an erroneous theoretical postulate whose without empirical verification. The class demographics of UK and Uganda cited by Museveni are not only misleading but also erroneous, because class configuration in the United Kingdom did not destroy sectarianism in the United Kingdom, as Museveni's theory falsely predicts. There is no causal relationship between the existence of a particular class and the ideology or political philosophy that determines the membership to a particular sectarian political party. Museveni's social theory seems to have been formulated with political objectives in mind rather than a desire for intellectual enlightenment or objective historical explanation of social change or evolution. Let us test the validity of Museveni's theory from both historical and comparative perspectives. By sectarianism, Museveni means social divisions, not based on philosophy, ideology, or class, but on religious faith and or ethnicity. Museveni argues that restructuring of the social classes can and must cure sectarianism or make it automatically disappear. Ironically, the argument against sectarianism, as originally articulated by Museveni, was in fact so convincing that it was bought by not only by Ugandans, but also by people in Western countries. The mystery here is how smart academicians at Makerere University, other universities did not exist at that time, so I exempt them from this criticism, especially in the Department of Political Science and the Faculty of Law, could have peddled Museveni's theory without exposing its flaws and obvious shortcomings. Was this probably part of the process that culminated into institutional corruption, as we shall suggest elsewhere in future conversations? Or was it the result of an inadequate academic program at the university, that is, the absence of a course on social theory which combines jurisprudence, history, philosophy, and sociology, or political theory, and economic theory? I don't know the answer. To use Museveni's own terminology, the The argument was nothing more than ideological obscurantism. Museveni's argument and rationalization, nevertheless, was seen by the gullible, politically naive as a potent cure for tribalism in Africa. First, what was happening in Europe was seen as irrelevant to Africa. Second, since no self-respecting Ugandan could dare proudly proclaim himself or herself a tribalist publicly by condemning Museveni's invalid social theory of sectarianism, no one had the courage to point out any errors in Museveni's theory. This amounted either to intellectual cowardice, academic lethargy, or outright institutional corruption of the academic institutions. Museveni's argument was shrewdly packaged and presented as an objective intellectual argument. Sectarianism was not only condemned but also made illegal, supposedly, in order to legislatively remove it from the social fabric of Uganda. Sectarianism was, it was further argued, directly linked to and exacerbated by the existence of political parties in Uganda. The assumption was, as Museveni's theory postulated, that sectarianism was inherently a part of the level of political evolution and or social and economic development reflected in class structure or configuration. The level of economic development achieved by Uganda, characterized by absence of a broad class divisions in the social structure, was not politically conducive to the existence of multipartyism, Museveni argued. If multiparties were permitted to exist, they would be organized and coalesce around sectarian divisions, namely ethnicity and religion. African political history, unfortunately, conspired to promote Museveni's social theory as a valid explanation of African politics, even though it was in fact fallacious and invalid. The argument against sectarianism was so convincing that the Penal Code was amended in 1988, 2 years after NRM came to power, to ban sectarianism in Uganda by virtually with virtually no opposition in the National Resistance Council, that's NRSC. Sectarianism was incorporated as a part of the law of sedition. What escaped most people was the fact that the law of sedition, inherited from the colonial regime, which Museveni detested and openly castigated as a political evil or colonial relic, was in fact designed by the colonial regimes to suppress political freedom. Museveni, in an ironical twist, became a jurisprudential collaborator of colonialism. Talk about odd couples. Dictatorial and authoritarian regimes are like birds of the same feathers. They flock together. This was Museveni and the colonial regime, finding a common destiny in the law of sedition. The colonial law of sedition was given more teeth by Museveni to fight the ghost or purported ghost of sectarianism. Nevertheless, criminalizing sectarianism was a shrewd way of selectively punishing political opponents under the pretense of fighting sectarianism, while appearing to be upholding the virtues of the rule of law. This is exactly what happened under Museveni's NRM regime. There are three fundamental assumptions or premises about sectarianism in Museveni's theory, which we need to scrutinize. First, it is assumed that sectarianism is inherently incompatible with democracy. Second, it is assumed that sectarianism can be wiped out by legislation, that is, by criminalizing it. Lastly, it is assumed that sectarianism is an exclusive characteristic of the so-called primitive or backward societies, to use Museveni's terms, phrases. That is, societies at the lowest end of political evolution and economic development, and therefore, presumably, does not exist in societies described as modern, economically developed, or industrialized. Implicit in the last assumption or postulation that sectarianism is caused by pre-industrial class structure. All these assumptions are obviously invalid. They all fall within Museveni's theory of social metamorphosis. As to whether sectarianism is inherently incompatible with democracy, we find two thriving democracies, India and Israel, have not been adversely affected by sectarianism. This statement may come as a big surprise to those who have been converted to Museveni's theory of sectarianism. Let us look at the facts, as science requires us to do. Both India and Israel have political parties based on sectarian elements of religion and ethnicity. In India, the BJP emerged as the single largest political party in parliament in 1999 elections. BJP is a Hindu political party. In Israel, although the religious parties were smaller than either the Likud or the Labour Party in 1999, their influence was growing at the time. As a result, the Shah's Party of Israel emerged as the third largest from the 1999 parliamentary elections and formed part of the ruling coalition put together by Prime Minister Ehud Barak in 1999. Clearly, sectarianism, however defined, has not destroyed democracy in India and Israel. In fact, sectarianism has even played a positive role in Israel. Given the nature of politics in Israel, a predominantly Palestinian or Arab party in Israel is necessary in order to advance the interests of the Arab community, which, for obvious reasons, would not be effectively catered for by the other political parties, which are either predominantly Jewish in composition or exclusively religious by affiliation. The Muslims in India are similarly situated as the Arabs in Israel. Although India has the third largest Muslim population in the world, the Muslims are a minority in India and often find political refuge in a predominantly Muslim political party. Another place where sectarianism is a part of the democratic process is Northern Ireland. In Northern Ireland, the peace agreement of 1998 and the formation of the Northern Ireland coalition government of 1999 for the first time in 27 years after long bloody wars would have been impossible if sectarianism was made illegal in Northern Ireland. That sounds paradoxical, but it is true. Most of the Northern Ireland political organizations are founded on either religious or ethnic affiliation. The two elements often merge as one. All the participants in the peace process in Northern Ireland in 1998 were in one form or another sectarian. During the Northern Ireland elections, which brought the 1999 coalition government to power, each party campaigned independently and appealed to a sectarian constituency. Under the NRM ideology or political philosophy of anti-sectarianism, all the political parties in Northern Ireland would be prohibited to organize themselves as autonomous political entities operating within civil society. Not only would prohibiting sectarianism be anti-democratic in Northern Ireland, but it would have guaranteed the continuation of the bloody sectarian violence, and as a result, no peace would have been possible in Northern Ireland in the foreseeable future. Museveni, wake up to the facts. As the cases of Israel, India, and Northern Ireland clearly demonstrate, one cannot prohibit sectarianism without violating fundamental freedoms and inalienable rights of freedom of association. People have fundamental rights to organize themselves peacefully in any manner they see fit, so long as they are not pursuing, so long as they are pursuing legitimate interests in politics, economy, religion, religious faith, or culture. It is discrimination, emphasis discrimination, that should be made illegal, not sectarianism. And I hope my listeners can draw a distinction between the two, as I do. There is a difference between discrimination and sectarianism. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I've been reminded that we need a break. I was on a marathon to finish this, but that's okay with me. And so I'll be back in a few minutes.
You are listening to Voice of Uganda Radio, the mouthpiece of all Ugandans, wherever they may be, to voice their problems without fear of any retribution. The Voice of Uganda Radio works in sync with FADU, the Federalist Alliance of Democracy and Development in Uganda. FADU is an organization that was formed to work as a platform for all Ugandans at home and outside, to work synergistically to liberate our mother Uganda from the ruthless invaders that have sucked it dry. Therefore, FADU invites all able Ugandans to act now and save the Ugandan humanity that is being slaughtered, destroyed, and robbed by a few people unworthy to call themselves Ugandans. Many people are crying for action in Uganda as they languish in misery. But FADU echoes their cries by making the loudest alarm to everyone to join FADU, not tomorrow or the next day, but today. The number to join is 408-904-7038. The email is info@fadu.org.
ekolaganira wamu n'ekibiina ekya Federalist Alliance of Democracy and Development in Uganda, FADU. Ebigendererwa by'ekibiina kino kuzza mirembe, enkolagana ey'awamu, obwenkanya, okuggyawo enkola y'omwana waani, n'okusosola mu mawanga, okutulugunya, okulya enguzi, ebikudde ejjembe mu Uganda. Era kirwanirira okuzza enfuga eya demokrasiya mu Uganda. Ekibiina kino kye kisookedde ddala okukubiriza buli muntu yenna okukyegattako awatali kusosola mu mawanga n'enzikiriza oba ekitundu omuntu kyalimu mu nsi yonna. Kino kye kiseera twegatte tusobole okuzza obupya ensi yaffe Uganda edobonkanyizibwa. Buli eyandyagadde okwegatta ku kibiina kya FADU kuba ennamba eno 1-8-4-7-3-8 oba weeyambise email info@fadu.org.
Fellow citizens, we call upon you to practice resistance and protest against Museveni. We call upon you to oppose strongly the Museveni government, which is responsible for the downfall of Uganda. It is important to know that Museveni is afraid of the millions of people who are living for that day, for the light of day when Uganda will be liberated from his dictatorial regime. Fellow citizens, it's been 24 years of dictatorship. We should all know that at present our drive for freedom has already grown so strong that Museveni has already begun to change his tactics. We call upon people to participate, to organize silent stand-ins for a free Uganda. We call upon people to demonstrate that we're tired of him. We call upon governments in the United States of America and abroad, people in responsible positions, politicians, only to act in the service of peace, justice, and freedom for Uganda.
Hello, I'm back to democratization in Africa, the case of Uganda in comparative perspective, and I've been discussing in this conversation the issue of sectarianism and how it is portrayed in Museveni's theory, social theory, under which he justified even putting certain articles in the Constitution to create the movement system in order to supposedly cure sectarianism in Uganda. Our last example comes from the United States about sectarianism. Organizations like the National Association of the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, which would be branded sectarian under the crude NRM definition of sectarianism, were created and still exist in order to protect what would otherwise be defined as sectarianism. But in fact, the protection of the political interests and human rights of the colored people in United States beginning in 1911. The NAACP, under the brilliant and visionary litigator John Marshall, later appointed as the first African-American justice of U.S. Supreme Court by President Johnson in 1967, he creatively initiated many of the litigations that led to the abolition of racial segregation in the United States in 1954 in a case called Brown versus the Board of Education. NAACP was a central element from its creation in 1911 in the struggle for racial equality in the U.S. To paint NAACP as a sectarian organization and therefore declare it illegal, as sectarian law in Uganda would be a failure to understand the role of freedom of association in bringing about social change and protecting inalienable human rights. I cannot conceive of any other organization other than NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, fighting for the colored people other than NAACP. So, before we pass judgment on the illegality and the, otherwise the bad aspects of sectarianism, we have to understand and to remember all these facts. And the examples, universal examples, in comparative perspective I've given from India, Israel, Northern Ireland, and now United States. The assumption that religious and ethnic sectarianism is the result of the absence of specific class configuration in the form of either modernity or industrialization is theoretically dead wrong. We are fully aware that the vicious ethnic and religious sectarianism that took place in and broke up Czechoslovakia occurred in a modernized industrial society with a fully developed middle class. So obviously Museveni's theory is wrong on the facts. These European societies were not pre-industrial societies, which Museveni's social metamorphosis theory presumes exist in Africa in general and Uganda in particular. Moreover, the sectarian or ethnic conflicts in Central Europe took place at the time the author of the Sowing of the Mustard Seed was literally writing or finishing writing the book in the mid-1990s, which the invalidity theory, when the invalidity theory was formulated. If Museveni was intellectually objective and honest and had bothered to test the validity of his theory on the empirical evidence available and the events going on at the time in Central Europe, at the time he was writing Sowing of the Mustard Seed, he would have realized that his theory was invalid because the social metamorphosis of class configuration could not explain the vicious sectarian conflicts that were going on in those Central European countries, under which the equivalent of genocide was committed. The causal relationship between class configuration and religious or ethnic sectarianism postulated by social metamorphosis theory is clearly invalid. In diagnosing the causes of sectarianism in Africa and Uganda in particular, Museveni was obviously wrong. Consequently, his theoretical prescriptions for the cure of sectarianism in Uganda, and especially in the 1995 Constitution, are equally invalid and misplaced. Based on the premises of his theory, Museveni concluded that, quote, the most extreme blow to sectarianism is to monetize the world economy, which will undermine the existence of most Africans. A commodity relationship between one area and another will in time undermine sectarianism. Therefore, ethnicity and sectarianism, in my view, that's Museveni writing, are short-term problems caused by a failure to identify the real interests of the people. It is a failure of the leaders since they have not created an atmosphere where ordinary people can discover their real interests. Now, this is Museveni writing in his Sowing of the Mustard Seed. Museveni, by introducing the movement system in 1986 and promulgating in the 1995 Constitution, or amending the law of sedition in 1988, supposedly to eradicate sectarianism, and also enacting recently the Public Order Management Act in 2013 to suppress political freedom. He has been engaging in violation of human rights. All these repressive policies and laws must be condemned and immediately repealed. The quotation above, which from the Sowing the Mustard Seed, is particularly interesting to us. Not only does it illustrate the invalidity of the social metamorphosis theory, it also clearly reveals to us the not-so-hidden fact that the theory Museveni propounds is actually pure politics. In this instance, Museveni blames the failure of the leaders to identify the interests of the people as one of the causes of sectarianism. That is clearly a political statement rooted in ideology and not in scientific explanation of cause and effect in human behavior. It is not consistent with the premises of his social metamorphosis theory. On the one hand, sectarianism is caused by specific class configurations in society and therefore beyond the control of individuals and groups. But this means that its solution is a long-term process that requires social metamorphosis to take place before the problem can be solved. But at the same time, the leaders, as you can read, this means politicians in a particular society can be blamed for not identifying, quote-unquote, the interests of the people in order to prevent the adverse consequences of sectarianism. Both propositions cannot be valid at the same time. In earlier conversations later on, we give more evidence to show that Museveni's social metamorphosis theory was motivated by politics and not scientific inquiry or explanation. So the role of politics in causing sectarianism took a new turn when the NRM, which criminalized sectarianism in Uganda, was accused by one of its strong supporters, Justice G.W. Kanyehamba, of being, quote, riddled with blatant ethnicism, unquote. Even worse, President Museveni, the author of the theory of social metamorphosis, was embroiled in a scandal involving a clear case of sectarianism on his part. In a letter dated July 15, 2008, to the Minister for the President, Beatrice Wabudeya, Museveni proposed, quote, ring-fencing the L5 positions in the whole of Bunyoro region for indigenous people, and also ring-fencing the sub-county leadership in the whole of Bunyoro, unquote. Now, this is a man who claims to be not sectarian. Museveni's solution to sectarianism in Bunyoro was triggered by the conflicts between the Bafuriki, or immigrants, and the Banyoro, who are indigenous to the area. Museveni did not propose a principled solution to the problem. Museveni, in his communication to Wabudeya, was gasping for a principle which he did not and could not have. There was a clear conflict between Museveni's theory of social metamorphosis and his political greed for power. Museveni, second, in his communication to Wabudeya, the Minister for the Presidency, proposed what he believed was a nationalist solution to the problem of sectarianism in Bunyoro, namely ring-fencing the positions of member of parliament in the whole of Bunyoro region for indigenous people except for special constituencies, unquote. It is hypocritical for a leader who is not supposed to practice sectarianism to make such proposals as a solution to a conflict between people who are full citizens of Uganda and are entitled to equal protection of the law under the Constitution and international law. It is not surprising, therefore, that Museveni practices discrimination in the promotion of military officers of UPDF and his relationship with the Tutsis and Bahima among the Banyarwanda and the Banyankore, respectively. So this is not a man with a principle. Whatever he was talking about sectarianism was supposed to be for the consumption of the public for political reasons. The second assumption, namely that legislation can cure sectarianism, is based on both a false reading of history, examples of which we have given already, and paradoxically serious questioning and undermining the validity of Museveni's theory itself. Sectarianism, as defined by Museveni, is based on personal identity, either in the form of religious belief or ethnicity. To the extent legislation cannot prevent people from assuming a certain identity and using that identity to pursue certain legitimate political interests, it is futile to talk about criminalizing sectarianism as a means of creating political harmony in society. The election of John F. Kennedy, for example, in 1960, was partly due to the triumph of sectarianism in the form of individual liberty. Kennedy was the first Catholic president of the United States of Irish descent in almost 200 years in the U.S. His personal identities, based on religion and ethnicity, could not have been abolished by law in a free society. However, the Irish and the Catholic identities must have both cost and earned Kennedy some votes from the people he shared or did not share his identities with, respectively. That is a sociological as well as a historical fact that cannot be denied or even changed. Since these identities cannot be destroyed by legislation, it is useless to assume that criminalizing sectarianism can effectively wipe out of society those identities. Sectarianism, when criminalized, is not like the crime of theft. Committing theft is morally wrong, but carrying out certain religious or ethnic identities cannot and should not be criminalized. What should be criminalized is discrimination, not belonging to or promoting certain identities. There is a big difference between the two. Moreover, if sectarianism is allegedly caused by the absence of specific configuration of class structure, it cannot logically or sociologically be abolished by mere legislation alone. And if the emergence or existence of specific class configurations cures sectarianism, logically and sociologically, there is no need or value to use law to declare sectarianism illegal. The real question is, how does or should a democratic political system deal with this sectarianism? The solution, in our opinion, lies in protecting individual liberty and the sovereignty of the people, just as they did in U.S., Ireland, Israel, and India. Protecting political freedom is the most effective means of fighting sectarianism. Political parties organized along rigid sectarian lines, whether religious or ethnic, are eventually weakened or even eliminated by free and fair electoral processes. In the long run, the people will vote rationally, that is, in such a way as to ensure the survival of the most politically viable, ideologically coherent, and philosophically effective and rational political organizations. Indeed, this has already happened in UK and US, where heresy two-party systems, tracing their origins in the early 1800s, exist. Eventually, all mature political systems end up with two major political parties. These political result does not occur by accident. It is the result of the process of social causation in which political freedom plays a crucial role in the process of a maturing and democratizing or rationalizing political system. The assumption that the people in pre-capitalist societies are too backward to understand the electoral process is an abuse of the intelligence of ordinary people in Africa. It makes Museveni a true collaborator of the colonialists he wants to disparage. Such a belief is not different from what the colonialists and the apartheid diehard believed about the intellectual incapacities of Africans. The theory on which such beliefs were based, and now we have shown, is invalid. As we have pointed out elsewhere in this conversation, political parties that are built on irrational theories and ideologies such as the Communist Party of USSR and the National Party of South Africa, they eventually become extinct. NRM, unless it is fundamentally transformed, is destined for the same fate. As we have clearly illustrated with examples from India, Israel, Northern Ireland, and the US, sectarianism was not eliminated by the reconfiguration of class structures of modernized or industrialized societies, which supposedly do not exist in Africa today. Sectarianism is a part of human nature. That is why it cannot be eliminated by either legislation or by transformation of new class structures or the process of modernization of society. The basic ingredients of the human nature cannot be transformed in a few thousand years. Biological evolution is a very slow process with no specific predetermined blueprint to follow. That is what the theory of evolution teaches us today. Another area where the line between politics and the metamorphosis social theory is now blurred and contorted is where Museveni, in applying his theory, causally connects the social configuration in Africa with the quick and ignominious capitulation of Uganda's feudal leaders to British colonialism. On the one hand, Museveni attributes the absence of social metamorphosis which took place in Europe to Africa's backwardness. On the other, he blames the feudalists for the colonial conquest of Africa. The social metamorphosis theory is used to explain backwardness as a historical fact. It is also used to explain and blame the politics that led to the colonization of Africa. This theoretical and political mumbo-jumbo makes neither scientific nor historical sense. Theories are explanations. In order for a theory to be valid, the empirical content of its premises must be valid and capable of leading to valid, verifiable conclusions. Otherwise, the premises of a theory cannot yield valid explanations about historical facts or serve as a basis for scientific prediction of future events. Fortunately, the historical facts which the social metamorphosis theory is trying to explain are now common knowledge. Let us begin with the argument that capitulation of a class of leaders known as feudalists is responsible for colonization of Africa. First, none of the premises in the metamorphosis social theory can lead directly to this conclusion. The conclusion is simply postulated from ideological and political premises. It is pure politics. The conclusion is political opinion and not scientific explanation. It is not a scientific conclusion derived from the premises of the theory of social metamorphosis. However, the historical facts do not bear out Museveni's political conclusions. Museveni had a good occasion which he used to amplify his theory. This occasion was the response to the riots that took place on September 9 to 11, 2009, involving one of the so-called feudalists. When Museveni addressed MPs on the subject of the riots, he gave a rambling explanation about African kings, politics, and colonialism, which had neither logic nor a valid causal explanation, but rationalized on the basis of his theory of social metamorphosis. Museveni linked tribalism, kingship, and colonialism in an amorphous chain of historical causation. Museveni said, quote, "We are totally against the kings being involved in politics. The kings failed to defend the sovereignty of Africa. That is why we were colonized. The colonization of Africa was a vote of no confidence in tribalism and pre-colonial kings. Africa failed to defend herself because of tribalism and the tribal political organization. Modern Africa must transcend and discard tribal organization." Unquote. That's Museveni. That was a speech to the MPs. It was published in the New Vision, and I think many of you may have seen it. This particular argument or explanation is a favorite one for Museveni's politics. He has repeated it many times on different occasions. Will repetition convert this fiction into validity, factual validity? What is not clear is why Museveni has not yet, up to now, realized that his argument makes no sense historically, logically, and even politically. Let us look at each of the three components identified as is this statement supposed to explain why Africa was colonized? There are many reasons why colonization was undertaken and how it was accomplished, which have nothing to do with the tribalism and feudalism. Some colonies were established for profit reasons. Monarchies in Europe granted company charters to business adventurers for that purpose. Others were established to exploit natural resources such as gold and silver, or growing cash crops such as tobacco, cotton, and sugar cane. In most cases, colonization succeeded for the simple reason of technological superiority of the Maxim gun, like the one Captain later Lord Lugard brought to Uganda and used effectively to suppress, quote, the feudalists, namely Kabaka Mwanga and Omukama Kabarega. It would not matter how strong or brave the pre-colonial kings could have been, they had no chance of outfiring the Maxim gun with spears, no matter how sharp and accurate the spears were. Even the Ashanti king, the Asantehene, who killed the colonialists and displayed their skulls as trophies in his palace, was eventually defeated. So it is not clear, except politics, why Museveni is blaming the pre-colonial kings and feudalists, read sectarianism, for the success of colonialism. There is no necessary causal relationship. The statement Museveni made to Parliament, quoted above, was pure politics, and for that matter, irrational pure politics. In fact, the statement verges on dishonesty because Museveni was fully aware that superior technology possessed by the British explains why the Africans were defeated in the colonial battles. Museveni writes specifically about Ankole, where he is believed to come from, that in the pre-colonial era, quote, clans were in a constant warfare against themselves, usually over cattle and grazing rights. None of these clans was strong enough to defeat the other, so they kept on with the indecisive conflict, no one clan gaining the upper hand. When the British came, with their superior technology and organization, they imposed a new form of law and order. That was one of the good things which the colonialists brought to this area. And that's Museveni, I'm quoting, if you can believe me, that's Museveni writing in the Mustard Seed on page 3. This statement clearly shows that Museveni has no principle to guide what he says. In view of Museveni's own statement, quoted above, he is in fact dishonest in making the charges he makes against the pre-colonial kings. It is also astounding to note that Museveni is appreciating the fact that the colonialists established a new form of law and order which was good but had eluded the Africans for centuries. And yet, in the same breath, as we have seen, Museveni castigates the colonial regimes as having had a totally negative effect on African society. Museveni wants to have it both ways. Now we know that most of the ambiguities and gaps in his story must be the result of politics and not scientific explanation. But Museveni also commits many other egregious eras. Museveni, for example, argues that the pre-colonial kings, quote, failed to defend the sovereignty of Africa, unquote. This is an empty and dishonest claim in view of what we have demonstrated in the previous paragraphs. In Uganda, the Omukama Kabarega and the Kabaka Mwanga did their best to resist colonialism, but eventually had to fail due to the technological reasons of which Museveni is fully aware. Moreover, there was no such thing as sovereignty in Africa, or sovereignty of Africa. In pre-colonial Africa, Museveni should read this his African history more carefully. Sovereignty in pre-colonial Africa was vested in clans, ethnic communities, or tribes, respectively, as Museveni himself acknowledges. It is an illusion based on false assumption to have expected all Africans simply by virtue of their color or African identity to put up a united African resistance to colonialism. Moreover, Africans too, like the other races and ethnicities elsewhere, are very diverse. A Dinka is as different, a Dinka in the Sudan is as different from a Zulu and a Kung, or as a Chinese is different from an Australian Aborigine and a Scottish. In all its history, Africa has never been a single political unit in which sovereignty was vested in all Africans collectively. Even today, the same Pan-Africanist Museveni argues against the single continental government of Africa in opposition to grandiose dreams of his late friend Colonel Muammar Gaddafi who wanted a continental government for Africa. How can Museveni then turn around and blame pre-colonial kings for having failed to undermine an imaginary African sovereign entity which never existed? Museveni very often contradicts himself anyway. For example, he says that colonialism, quote, was a vote of no confidence in tribalism, unquote, and that tribalism enabled colonialism to succeed. We have already explained why colonialism succeeded and had no conqueror, the African, to conquer the African pre-colonial ethnic communities. There is no reason to blame pre-colonial kings for the colonization of Africa. Museveni seems to have a vendetta with the feudalists, which cannot be rationally explained. It is sufficient for us to point out that it would be contradictory to promote non-political cultural leadership without preserving the tribes or ethnic groups as cultural entities. Every culture in Africa is autonomous and defined by ethnic sovereignty. Museveni does not seem to know, understand, or even appreciate this fact. In a strange application of logic and misinterpretation of historical facts, Museveni applies his theory of social metamorphosis to explain how colonialism caused, quote, Africa to miss out on the human revolution from pre-capitalist to capitalist modes of production, unquote. This conclusion is reached because colonialism, quote, was the greatest form of ideological obscurantism because it completely obscured reality, and thus the understanding of the numerous social and economic issues that had to be dealt with, unquote. And this is from the Sowing, the Master Seed, page 201. Here Museveni is clearly modeling partisan politics, historical explanations with the scientific theory. The result is a distortion and misinterpretation of history. The historical time scale Museveni uses is too strange to make sense. The Industrial Revolution he credits for metamorphosis that occurred in Europe to the exclusion of Africa took place almost a century before Africa colonized, before Europe colonized Africa in the late 1890s and 1800s. And yet, Museveni argues that it was colonialism that prevented Africa from creating the reconfiguration of African class structures by social metamorphosis that took place in Europe a century earlier. Colonialism did the opposite of what Museveni accuses it of doing. Colonialism in Africa speeded up the process of class formation. In fact, the capital theory written by Karl Marx, which we quoted earlier, we explained earlier, reached the conclusion that colonialism speeded up the transformation of the colonies, citing India as the best example. Colonialism did this by introducing in Africa new forms of economic production supplemented by a monetary economy. These two factors inevitably accelerated the class formation and the social change, but Museveni is claiming the opposite. So colonialism did the opposite. In Uganda, for example, the introduction of the freehold land tenure system in Uganda, called the Mile land system, quickly created new land and landholding classes. It also stimulated new economic activities which led to rapid economic development in the central region of Uganda, which is ahead in the development of all the other areas in Uganda. Therefore, on all accounts, the theory formulated by Museveni fails to explain what it set out to do. Since the theory itself is invalid, we need not argue this point further. What is important to point out is the failure by Museveni to distinguish clearly between politics, political philosophy, ideology, and social theory. We explore this issue in our next conversation, and we will discuss, for example, the inalienable rights and NRM philosophy, and particularly we shall use the two examples of the 10-point program and the CA debate to illustrate these points. So until then, I say goodbye, and don't forget to tune in next week, same time, same place. Thank you. This is Mubilu Musoke.
Call upon people to use all legal and imaginative means and methods in order to ensure peace, justice, and freedom for Uganda. We call upon people from the north and south, from the east and west, and yes, from the central province of Uganda to be loyal to one another. We must preserve our loyalty to human dignity. We call upon people once again not to wait until it is too late to begin thinking about a free Uganda. We call for a new attitude. Arise, fellow citizens, arise. Let us fight for a free Uganda. Museveni must go.